Monday morning event.
Donna, we're live.
We're live.
Hi, everybody. Barry McGuire here. It's a Monday main event for Barry McGuire's Creative Real Estate Education Group. Now, normally on Mondays, this is Donna's show, but I'm here today. We have a special guest that I want to be in on the conversation. And so today we're welcoming Chris Davies. Chris has a lot of background in real estate. My goodness. His grandfather cut a swath in investment real estate in Edmonton. His mom and dad have been involved. They had Davies Property Management. So Chris is a third generation investor. So he's got a ton of experience, obviously, because mom and dad ran a management company. He's got a whole bunch of experience on the management side. He is specializing in multifamily dwellings. He's married to Megan, got 5 active kids. He's a hunter. Chris is a whole bunch of things. And he's really so pleased that he's agreed to come on today and just start from the very bottom of multifamily and to talk to us about it. Yes, Tom.
He's also an author. Apartment buildings that outperform. Who better?
Who better?
Do we not get the best experts for you guys?
Apartment buildings that outperform, and that's what everybody wants to hear about. So multifamily is where everybody seems to want to go in real estate. Folks start out with a property here and a property there and move up to a duplex or a fourplex. But most people talk about wanting to get into multifamily because I don't even think they're quite sure why they want to do that. But that's one of the things we'll be asking Chris to talk about in the multifamily sphere to start us off right at the beginning and talk to us about multifamily and maybe how he would coach someone who's considering getting into it. Say they've got the resources. Of course, it's a bigger purchase. It takes more money. But let's bring in Wayne Hillier and Chris Davies, and we'll start this conversation about multifamily. Chris, thanks for showing up. Wayne, thanks for always being here and helping us. So,
gotcha.
Here we go.
It's exciting to be not having to chase my kids around the house right now. Working from home has been a new experience.
Yeah, you're probably in trouble. So, well, maybe Megan's
probably. Yeah. Better than average chance someone's going to knock on my door and come in and join me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well.
So I'm just going to interrupt for a second. Honey, you're not leading.
I'm not.
You're participating.
I'm participating. Right then. Okay. So I'm just going to toss this over to Chris Davies, who can just give us a start on multifamily. I'm going to zip my lip for a bit.
Yeah, I don't know. It's such a big topic. I mean, we were saying in the text that multifamily goes in a lot of different directions, but it's funny, a lot of people feel like they need to do a multifamily thing, or that like apartments are somehow graduating to the next, like some sort of magical next level. I think most lawyers start with definitions, like most good contracts. For me, and for most people, multifamily is anything that's 5 units or more. And that's the Real Estate Board in Edmonton's definition, that's CMHC's definition, and that's usually most banks' definition. It just attracts a different type of tenant. I mean, there are structural things that can be more efficient or less efficient. There are tenants that can be better or worse, or stay longer, or stay less time, or turn over faster. But I think the reason a lot of people like multifamily right now is you reach a point where you get tapped out on how much financing you can get. Eventually the banks start to say no, because you've just got too many properties and they don't debt service.
Right.
And then all of a sudden people realize if you go to commercial properties, the banks really look at you as a better risk the more doors you have. On the other hand, you're in a much deeper pool. and they play dirty pool. They make you pay for 3, 4, 5 different lawyers, maybe just 2 lawyers on a file.
Break it down just a little bit. That was a lot.
That was a bunch
already. So
and I
my
have 10
concept,
questions from what he just said.
right? Okay, so we're just gonna slow it down. Keep you here for the whole hour. Take your coat off, get comfy.
Yeah.
That's what Wayne, he thought he was gonna scoot through all of this and then back to the kids. Oh.
I'm in my basement. It's usually cold down here.
Okay. All right, Wayne, go ahead. I'm just checking something, so you go ahead.
Me?
Oh, sorry.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, let me pause for a second, and I'll explain the question I get from 90% of people and what that story is, and then we can unpack that or go to some of Wayne's questions. 90% of people who call me say, you know, I got a bunch of houses in Edmonton. 2 versions right now, actually. I got a bunch of houses in Edmonton or wherever, and the bank is starting to say no. So I'm going to switch. Or I've been successful raising JV money, and I'm going to switch to doing more deals. Right now, I also get a lot of calls from Vancouver and Toronto saying, I sold my garage and I have a spare $1 million. What can I do with it? And either way, they come to me and say, like, what are apartment buildings, you know, and why are they different, and how do we kind of approach it? So that is the call I get. You know, I probably get 5 to 7 people a week, new people calling me right now. It is ridiculously busy.
You know what? I think 90% of the people that I hear that want to get into multifamily, they want to do it because they heard Grant Cardone say, don't buy anything under 30 doors. So Grant Cardone,
I saw a video the other day. It's just like the number of units is the number one thing, and then cash flow. And I was like, I don't know, Grant. I don't. Maybe.
So people hop into real estate investing, and their first task is to raise $700,000 because that's what Grant Cardone said, and it's a little discouraging. But also, I also feel like, not to put multifamily down, I think it's tremendous. It's one or the other. It's residential or multi. I don't think one's greater than the other. The other reason I think is people think that it's attached to their ego. They want to feel cool to think, yes, I own an apartment building, as opposed to I own 7 single family homes or I own 7 condos. Like, nah, I could do that too. But you own an apartment building. It's super cool, right?
It's ridiculous, the cred. And we've all stood in rooms where you had a little name tag with pins on them. Mm-hmm. And if you got the one with the building on it, you were extra special.
Right.
And like, there are lots of good reasons to buy apartment buildings. There's lots of like, I've had lots of clients in the last 2 years, longer than that, where I've said, you know what, you could do apartment buildings, but while you can still buy singles, basement suited properties, fourplexes, you should keep doing that until you've got a lot of extra cash, because you pay a lot of extra fees and things, not just lawyers. That to get into a small multi is not very efficient. You need some scale. So if you can keep doing houses, I mean, I love the tenants in houses. I will take that person as a manager all day long rather than go to a B or C class apartment building.
Why is it? Why do you like those particular tenants more?
They, you know, I still have a townhouse on the south side of Edmonton I bought in the middle of the Great Recession. And I'm on my 2nd set of tenants in 13 years. And in houses, people stay, you know, that type of timeline. In apartment buildings, like that is so incredibly rare. The average stay per unit in an apartment building is honestly about 18 months, 2 years. And from our management experience in a house, it's actually, I think statistically, we came up with 6 years if they have a full house. I mean, yeah. Well, apartments for a lot of people are transitory.
Single family homes normally families, you know.
Yeah.
Apartments, you know, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom units. You know, it's I find it to be like almost like a transitionary kind of unit where someone's they're younger or they have a small family, but eventually they want that 3rd bedroom. Eventually they'll want a yard, they want a dog, and that's when they upgrade. So you're absolutely right. I mean,
but I think it's a phase in everyone's career. I like basement suites have the same type of problem. which is that you might get into a really nice basement suite and pay a really good rent, but the minute you get a promotion at work or a better paying job, you're out of there. You want to get above the ground. And so when you get into multifamily, you kind of have to reset your expectations of the type of tenants you're going to get, because at the end of the day, real estate is all about the dirt and the people. And you can put whatever box you want on it, but the different boxes convey different people and the areas convey different people. It's always about the tenant at the end of the day, and the box is kind of immaterial. And I don't have a lot of time for the whole, pride ego thing, because I see the actual financials of who's making money on their buildings, and sometimes it's not the apartment guy.
So, Chris, does it make a difference on the ease of management and longevity of tenants, whether you have an A, B, C, D apartment?
Yeah, I think so. My dad had a great comment a long time ago that when you're trying to figure out a new area, to go like on a Thursday night at 9 o'clock and go to the Safeways and buy a loaf of bread and see who's hanging around there. And when you go to the suburbs and it's all just nice houses, it's very different than when you go to the type of area. And Edmonton's, like many cities, but not all cities, has multifamily that's very much clustered in certain areas. We'll have a 20-block strip that's just packed, and then nothing after that for blocks. So, you get people who want to live in a certain area. Maybe it's because of an ethnic or a religious community or a particular set of employers, but you definitely get, there are A-class buildings that will bring a tenant in and they will stay for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But you get a lot of people also who are looking for, it's the right building right now. I'm just in town for this job, but I'm not going to hold this job because I don't have any education. So you get a lot of the ins and outs of people that way. I think that's the answer to your question.
Yeah.
Do you find that you have to go outside of the larger cities into some smaller communities in order to actually get any good deals, to get some of those A and B properties?
Sometimes, yeah. And I think right now there's a huge, I get all these calls from Toronto, Vancouver, guys who are used to seeing, really limited cash flow and rents compared to the purchase price. For my money, I think that the real cash flow is in some of these secondary centers. Like around Edmonton, I love Camrose, Vegreville, Westlock, Barrhead, places like that. And you can go to those centers and find new quality buildings. St. Paul, actually. The thing in Edmonton is that, you're not seeing a lot of real world cash flow. What you're probably seeing today is the potential for real appreciation. You can come in and buy a, kind of a C plus building for 90 a door in ye old Queen Mary Park. And, those buildings back in the peak have traded for 120, 130 a door. A 30% lift on price is pretty okay.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about lift and we're talking about a value increase. What's the difference from residential to multifamily when it comes to like appreciation? Because if the market's hot, all the houses are going up. Does that also, the multifamily is going up as well, or is that how is that calculated?
There's a little bit of that does happen. Some people will say, it's price per door and they'll pay based on price per door. But for people who have been around, it's really about the cap rate. So how much net rent you're getting compared to the purchase price. If you were considering another like a bond or a GIC, you would call it yield. And with an apartment building, if the guy next door sells for more, that helps a little bit. But really, it's every time you raise your rent, the price goes up. That's just how it runs, is that the same building with lower rents will sell for less, even if it's got better renos. If it's not attracting a better bottom line, it's not worth more. There are some little modifiers.
So it's actually the rent.
Yeah.
So it's actually the rent that affects it. So if rent is increasing dramatically in a city, then that means the value of multifamily go up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the value of residential properties will go up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. When you renovate your kitchen, you get a big lift. When I renovate a kitchen, it doesn't make a difference in my building unless I'm actually attracting more rent. It might save me from a lower price in the future, And it's funny, like that, something not a lot of agents talk about, not a lot of investors talk about when they do these things, which was why now is probably a better time to buy than if I were going out to like Toronto or Hamilton or Surrey or somewhere where rents are really high and they're going up quickly. When you buy a building and the rents go up, your price goes up. But the thing about apartment buildings that we don't talk about is that if you buy in a busy market at a higher price and your rents go down, the value of your building comes down. If the vacancy rate or the expenses go up, anything that impacts that bottom line, your net operating income goes down, it can go the other way. And lenders will tap you on the shoulder and say, write me a check. I've had buildings go upside down that way. So I don't mean to scare people that way. But, when you're saying, yeah, should I go into like a crazy market or should I go where there's a slump? There are advantages to buying when things are down. When they're already bad, how much worse could those rents be? You want to get into a building and a market where you can improve the rents just getting to market, and then you can improve the rents by adding value through renovations.
In what circumstance would they say, cut me a check? I'm a little confused on that. Do you mind elaborating?
Yeah. I mean, if you buy a house and you get to the end of the renewal, you enter your 5-year term, your lender typically sends you like a 1-page form letter that says sign here and renew. And usually you haggle about the interest rate and that's it. Mm-hmm. With an apartment building, every year they want your full set of financials. Oh. And at the end of 5 years, they will take it and they will go through it. And if your loan it depends on the lender and if you're CMHC or not, but they'll take that loan and they have, a friend of mine owns 20 units in the West End, 149th Street. He got to the end of his term, didn't even owe that much. And even though he has an appraisal for $2.6 million, the bank said, well, we've looked at your financials and your building's only worth 1.8. So you owe us $400,000 or we're not going to renew your loan. What do you do in that situation? Like that's, yeah.
Wayne, this seemed like such a good idea, didn't it? To have this on, this will be so fun.
Negative so far. The rest is going to be like roses and rainbows.
Amazing. I know, man. That's why people love Barry's group. Like that's why this group is so good, is because it's honest, right? Yeah. We gotta cover both sides of the equation.
So yes, so people, you need to be aware of pros and cons and risks, mm-hmm. And it's not the next shiny thing necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah. As folks listen to this, I can hear people say what they've always said, which is I'm going to find a building that's in pretty good shape where the same guy has owned it for the last 25 years. And instead of being hard-headed, he's friends with all his tenants and he hasn't raised his rents mm-hmm. for a long time. And he's selling at a decent price, but there's a whole whack of room to increase the rents. So talk about Holy Grail. Everybody's looking for that apartment.
Yep, absolutely. And that's like, that's the nice thing because the rents dictate the price. You can have a guy who's selling a building and he says, yeah, I want $1 million. And you can look at the math because all you need are his rent rolls and maybe some financials to say, oh, it's worth $1.5 million. So you can come in and find a deal if they don't know how to measure it. Or maybe they've, maybe they've never done CMHC financing. And so they've only ever had a general mortgage, a conventional mortgage. I can talk today. A conventional mortgage right now is like 3% and a 25-year amortization. Your payments are big, your pay down is fast, but you can get CMHC money right now that's well under 2% and a 35-year amortization. Your cash flow goes bananas and you could probably afford to pay a little more. So just knowing that you can get better financing than the seller did can help you make more money. Knowing where you can move the rents helps. There's a whole bunch of bits I want to unpack, but that's part of what you're saying. You go ahead, Donna. You got a finger up.
Can you saw my finger? I don't have my. I have Barry instead of a pen today. There we go. Okay, there we go. Is there a quick and dirty formula that you could give us, Chris, on, say, the rent adds up to this much? It would be, the price would be X times the rent?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm going to make sure I have a little calculator out so that I don't screw up my simple math. The basic answer, and I'll give you some real good generalities. So if you have a building, 10-unit building, and everyone's paying $1,000 a month, that's $10,000 a month or $120 a year. You're probably going to spend 30 or 40 of that on expenses. So and we're not going to worry about mortgages yet. Mortgages don't play into this at all. So you might get $120,000 a year in your pocket, spend a bunch of, on utilities and repairs, and end up with $80,000 in your pocket. That's your net income. And then to figure out what that's worth as an investment, someone coming along, if it was a GIC, they might say, well, I want a 5 or a 6% return. If someone's looking for a 5% return, you go $80,000 divided by 5%. That stream of income is worth 1.6 million. So it's whatever that net income is. Never use mortgages, just the net income divided by the cap rate, in this case, whatever return you want, will spit out the number. So if you can increase your net.
Sorry, cap rate and return are
Yield.
They're interchangeable.
Cap rate and yield.
Cap rate.
And yield, yeah. The return gets into having, mortgages and how much you put in and the rest of it. We're just going to look at gross, like total yield. And, the more you can, the thing to think about cap rates, just like when you've got another investment, if you can increase your profit, your net income, then the price is going to go up. The same time, just like when you're looking at the price of a bond or a GIC, if that cap rate goes from a 5 to like you go to Vancouver and those cap rates go down to like a 3% yield, it's just a really expensive building. But you go to the boonies and then it starts to go up. So for most markets here, like a 5 or a 6 cap in Edmonton is pretty normal. You go to smaller towns, you might get a 7 or an 8. You go to Calgary, you're going to get a 4. You go to Vancouver or Toronto, you're going to get a 3. And you're just having to pay a lot more for any given stream of income.
Okay.
I have one other thought I wanted to unpack, which I scribbled down. I picked up these yellow legal pads. This is just how I like all my thoughts go on a yellow legal pad.
Yeah.
Barry talked about finding that magic building where it's in good shape and the owner's just a big softy, so he doesn't know how to increase rents. I think in every building there are 2 lungs. And much like if you maintain your body, it's going to work well. So the first half of that is how good the physical building is and has it been cared for? Because sometimes, we're dealing with most of these buildings were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So they are plenty old. You're looking for a building that has, didn't go to college and got drunk every night. Like we're looking for a building that's been just decently maintained its whole lifetime. The same thing too with the tenants. You want tenants that were just like gentle on the building. You want friendly families. You don't want kids smashing things. You don't want, you want a building that hasn't come off the rails, because there are lots of buildings that, some owner loses their nut and management stops paying attention, and now your building's full of drug dealers and cockroaches, and that stuff shows. Like when we tour buildings, you guys totally picture this. You go and you look at the cabinets, and there's that corner that's been rubbed off the corner of the cabinet, and you're like, how many layers of paint are on this thing?
Yeah.
You're like 6, 7, 8 layers of paint, and there's green on there. No. That's a building that's like been ridden hard and put away wet. You want the building where you can see the original paint, and you're like, okay, no one's beaten this thing up yet. It's going to be simpler to repair. It's going to be easier to take care of.
Right.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you had more
Nope.
examples.
I'm just gonna stop. Leave it there. Like, I have lots of examples.
I love watching Donna's little reactions.
Donna's scared of what in her heart. I think Donna's scared of what I'm going to say next a little bit. But
Oh boy, that's too funny. So
that's why I wrote a book.
Multifamily and residential are very different, is what you're saying. Like extremely different. I haven't seen anything that's actually the same. I haven't. Really?
Well, to go back to the original comment, it's all about you've got some land, you've got some people. What's the right box to go in the middle?
Right.
I mean, that's it. Most of the basic math of how you operate your business, like if you've already got it, the day-to-day management is not that different. You have income, you have expenses, you have people you need to take care of. Maintaining the physical systems in most aspects is pretty much the same. You know, toilets get stuck, cabinets break, appliances break. Your furnace is a little bit bigger and a little bit more expensive. Your roof is a little bit bigger and a little bit more expensive. But both of those things last a lot longer than they do in a residential house. So the financing and the getting into it is more complicated, which is to protect, I think, all the parties, lenders, buyers, sellers, everybody. But a lot of that, you know, it's just bigger and more complex. If you walked out and bought 10 houses at the same time, it'd be pretty friggin' complicated also.
Yeah. And so do you normally hire a property manager like you would for your residential properties, or do you hire a manager specifically for that property?
Yeah, I've seen it both ways. So a lot of lenders are actually going to require you or reserve the right to require you to get a professional manager. And one of the reasons a lot of people, especially going to secondary markets, pick an apartment building is because you can get, usually, you can get a property manager much easier than you can with a bunch of houses. Most people who buy houses are kind of disorganized and lots of managers. But an apartment building, especially a larger one, you're going to get a better quality, more professional manager. But for a lot of people, the idea when they get into multis is building a critical mass so you can have some of your own people working just for you. I don't know, that's always the right decision, but a lot of what happens is you kind of end up having to build it asset by asset, because we don't, most people don't show up to me with like, hey, I got $80 million. Let's go buy a whole bunch of stuff. It does happen, but it's rare. And I honestly think with most apartment buildings, you got to get to about 15 or 20 units before you can afford to have someone decent on site. Mm-hmm. But even then, if most of us are buying, B- to C- class buildings, your caretaker's not going to
define that, Chris?
Yeah.
You say B- to C-.
That's a great question. So, yeah, I have at different times, I'm sure I've written a blog post on exactly that topic, and now I can't think of it.
Speaking of blog posts, I can't say how many times I've typed in Google a question. I've been reference someone asked me a question about something, and I'll just Google it real fast for them. And I can't count how many times I've found your blog as the solution to whatever I Googled. So your blog is amazing.
Thank you. Yes. So I sat down with new clients from Toronto the other day, and they said, what about the Black Triangle of East Edmonton? And I was like, we wrote that blog post 13 years ago, and it's still it's in people's heads. Thank you, Google. So how do you define an A, a B, a C, a D class building? I will comment that most of the decent caretakers I've had in C class buildings don't have all their teeth. I had one that was a functioning alcoholic. And so maybe that's part of a I don't know, maybe that's part of the magic is they match the tenants. So a class A building is going to be, in my general experience, less than 10 years old. Sometimes a little bit older than that with exceptional maintenance, or maybe if it's townhouses, you can push all these a little bit longer, because townhouses, in my opinion, are just a superior product if you're going to get, a whole complex. A B class building and an A class building will almost always have an elevator. Elevators are a whole different webinar. They're insanely expensive and complicated. Mm-hmm. If you can avoid buying one, generally a good idea, unless you really know what you're doing. The split between a B and a C class building probably starts when the building is about 30 years old. At 30 or 35 years old, you are really out of date. Like, I've seen B class buildings that I think, like, and you can renovate a C into a B. It's really hard to renovate a B into an A. Like those cabinets I remember from the 90s, like cream colored fronts and like an oak railing across the top. Is that your cabinet behind you? No, sorry. It looked like the piece of, I love them. I'm just saying, tenants are different. You know, when you get that 90s like green carpet and those cabinets, you're like, well, this may have been a nice building when it was built in 93, and now we're just real old. So you've got to do something or you're going to turn into a C. C-class buildings are 30 years. You know, my building is what I would call a C. It was built in 1968. And, you know, here we are in 2021. I would say that buildings back to this window between C's and D's really runs from like 1950 to 1970. And this, just like someone who's old, like the reason Barry looks so good is he's not young, but I don't think he ever, you know, really went and partied hard, and he's always been fit and taken care of himself.
Oh,
Like Barry is.
He's a bass
buy
player.
me a beer sometime. I'll tell you some stories.
It's just an
I
example,
like
Don.
it.
It's not reality. It's just an example.
Edmontonians would know the Blues on White.
Yes.
Barry played at Blues on White, drank
I love it.
his gig fee,
Donna.
and doesn't. Oh,
But Wayne plays guitar, I drum. We're gonna have a trio. It'll be killer.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, now we're
I
talking.
like it. No, but yeah. But to get back to the thing, like, you know, that you know, 50s through 70s window is where if things are old, that's where, you know, that's where things start to fall apart. They can't get up the stairs. You know, and so I've been doing this part of my business for 10 years. And when I started, or even 5 years ago, we could take a building that was in the 50s or like early 60s, and I could sell it effectively. A buyer could come in and have the whole range of financing projects available and the full range of managers, and everything was cool. And now, I mean, we're working on new development stuff, because if you come along and buy a building that's built in 1950 and that has had hardware on it and not had the upgrades, 10 years from now, you don't have an exit. You're going to have buyers getting mediocre financing, or you've got to tear it down and rebuild it, or you've got to super renovate it. So that, like, it's a long-winded answer to Donna's question, because it's kind of a spectrum rather than chunk, chunk, chunk. And I've only recently understood or been able to articulate that, you know, two different sides of a building's lifestyle that needs to, you know, be taken into account when you're figuring out, am I looking at a B- or a C+?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So
I want to double back to Alona's question for a quick second. She asked, does CMHC look at financials every year? Your lender will. CMHC doesn't actually look at them. This is the funny thing about CMHC insurance. I'm getting into the weeds a tiny bit. CMHC will review the initial application and issue this insurance policy, and then they don't really look at it again. In the real world, it's actually all your lender. But it's kind of like, I have no idea why the system works this way. But after CMHC writes the insurance policy, it's up to the lender to make sure they comply. And CMHC is very seldom going to call the lender and be like, oh yeah, that looks great. If the lender screws it up, they void their own insurance policy. So they're being very careful. You go,
That's
Barry.
your answer. Chris, that's your answer about why CMHC never looks again. I mean, they do it at the beginning and they make sure that's all on board. And then they say to your lender, if you want your insurance policy to stay in force, You vet
Mhm.
this very carefully every year, and here's your guidelines, and you keep it in there. Or brother, if you have to foreclose, we won't be there for you. So that's you. I think you
And
were right
that
there with why. Yeah.
absolutely. And when I go back to look at my paperwork, Wayne, to go back to why lenders are sometimes like, hey, pay up or we're pulling your loan. Your insurance certificate will have a range of numbers in it. Like for debt service coverage is the number, like DCR is one of their big touchstones. And they just say in the insurance, if the income of the building gets outside of this range, your insurance is void. That's it. So it can get like, you know, as much as the upsides are great, you got to be really careful on the downsides and have reserves. It's why it's intention. Like I pretty much don't take on clients. This is the realtor meanie pants. I'm going to be mean for 1 minute.
Realtor meanie pants?
My realtor meanie pants. I pretty much
Such a gag.
I know, exactly. I don't take on clients with less than $250,000 in cash. You really need to have, and not like I have a partner. No, in the bank cash. And that's not only because I need to make sure that the deals are going to work and that we're looking for the right product. It's also because I want to be confident that I put a client into a building that they can afford. Not that they can scrape together, but 12 months from now, if they lose some tenants, they're not going to be, I don't want bankruptcies. I don't want foreclosures.
Yeah.
And if I lose clients because I'm too careful, that's okay too.
You're just doing a good thing, man.
Protecting them from themselves.
Yeah. Sometimes people don't like that answer. But you go.
Well, that kind of leads into what I was going to ask about. What does a multifamily investor look like? So, $250K in cash. Okay, good to know.
Yeah. What do I love? It's funny. I'm like, I have a big whiteboard beside me that's got a bunch of my deals on it. And like, I have a guy who's like a 22-year-old Asian guy who made some money, like moved from China when he was 16, made a bunch of money in Vancouver with some retail places. And he's looking for stuff that's very turnkey. He just wants safety. He doesn't want cash flow. I was like, okay, cool. I got a guy who's 78 years old, just dumping his extra money. Like, there is no consistency. What do I want that makes a good investor? Is someone who has reasonable cash, either their own or from partners they've worked with before, but real cash in the bank. Someone who's willing to ask good questions of me, of their manager, of their lawyer, of their lender, and they're willing to learn through the process. Most commercial realtors want to see that you own other property, which is kind of like, how do you get to be a multifamily investor? You buy multifamily. There's no secret that way, but our friend Jeff Gunther he's said many things to stick with me, but one of which is that when you're buying apartment buildings, your first deal is always kind of mediocre. It's always a single in the baseball world because nobody's willing to take a risk on you. You don't have experience to show the lenders. You don't have other property to show the realtors. So why would they bring you the killer deal that's out there? And that's just not me. That's just kind of the way things roll. You got to get in there and buy something you can afford, buy something that works, and the deals get better after that, generally.
You got to do it on your own. Your joint venture money isn't going to take a chance on you either because you have no track record. So that's why it's a single. But as we've said, and as a theme that goes through everything that we talk about, you got to get started. If that's where you want to be, you have to get started and listen to someone like Chris, who will say to you, we're gonna find you building, but it's gonna be like this for you. Chances are, we'll do what we can to make it as good as we can. But for these reasons, this is how your first one is likely going to be. But that's just the way it is. Are you ready to get going?
Totally. The big, especially in this group of people that's creative and is very familiar with joint ventures, the thing so many people miss out on is if you've been investing in just residential, suite houses, garage suites, whatever, and you built up a little portfolio and the bank is starting to say no, bring in investors on the stuff you already own. Sell them half of a house. bring them in, and then you're able to take the plunge into a multifamily and take the risk with your own money. And they get a building that's already stabilized. And then after you've done your 6 or 8 or 10 plex, then you can say, well, when you bought into this, I went and did this. Here's the nice story. Here's the building. Do you want to buy into my 10 plex, or should we go find another one? There's no need to go find an investor and convince them of an apartment building when you're not even sure. You haven't done it yet. Bring them in on your old stuff, because lots of people forget how easy it is to sell something you already own. And it doesn't have to be complicated. There are no time pressures. Yeah.
Write that one down. That's a really hot tip right there. That's a good tip.
Probably say it twice a week.
and one of my questions for you was going to be, how is raising funds different for multifamily compared to residential? Is it, typically when you want to buy a residential, you say, hey, we're going to go buy a house, and you go buy a house. It's a little bit different because you're normally raising, multiple partners depending on the size of your building, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, like if you're, people who are buying buildings with us in Edmonton are typically putting on a small one 300,000 down, and having another 100 in reserve. So you're looking at a capital raise that's, call it, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 at the bottom end. And that's probably more of an aggressive capital raise than I would have suggested, or like more cash coming into a deal than I would have suggested even just a couple of years ago. And some of that's my own experience getting burnt, and some of that's just the way the market's going with higher vacancies here and some older product. The couple of big things that are different is that a lot of lenders will require personal guarantees from folks. Like when you apply for a house, they care about your income. When you apply for an apartment building, no one has ever asked me what my income was. They check my credit, but they aren't like, how much did you make last year? How much, they're not calculating your TDS, GDS. They're looking at your net worth and the performance of the building. And that's pretty much it. So you do get clients who will be like, everyone's a client in my world. So you will get JV partners who are, maybe they have a lot of assets and they're risk adverse and they're not going to sign a personal guarantee. You have to look at different types of lendings where you don't have to have a personal guarantee. That can be some types of CMHC lending. That can be some types of conventional. And it comes with a lot more costs. I mean, I have done JV deals on single family myself where I don't take a fee. Like some people like to take 1% of the purchase price as a asset management fee, or they manage it more or less for free. In apartment building land, you do, as the real estate expert side of the coin, you do a ton of work, or as the actively managing partner, and you should get paid for that work.
Yeah.
Because it is a huge amount of time.
Interesting. We do have a question. Do you guys want to do a question?
Yeah. I'm cool with that.
All right. Tammy asks, hi, Chris. Do you or your lenders have something in front of me? Do you or your lenders have different cap rate criteria for A, B, C, D building in a smaller city? Example, qualification and interest rates dependent on level. Example. Smaller center, low tenant profile risk, age, insurance, property management requirements, liabilities, diamond in the rough. Thanks.
Yeah, it's funny. I can see where she's going with the question. And the funny thing is that it all depends. So when you're buying, the hope is that cap rates are the same. Like, you go into a market, and that could be Western Canada, Alberta, Edmonton, whatever. And even like Edmonton, north of the river, south of the river. Where's my map? 1, 2, that way. Edmonton, north of the river, you're generally looking at a 5 or a 5.5 cap. South of the river, you're looking at a 4.5 to a 5. So because they are distinctly different markets and attract distinctly different tenants. So cap rates between buildings do change a little bit. and for a whole bunch of complex reasons why. One of the reasons why is when we're trying to figure out, this is probably a good thing to talk about back at the beginning, that I don't think I've ever heard in an investment workshop. They only teach this in like realtor school and bankers school. The reason the cap rate might be 5% is that's what people are willing to pay, kind of institutionally. And that follows your alternative investment. And usually, like if you go follow like the graphs from the reports from our office or CBRE or anybody like that, there's that long-term bond curve, and then there's your cap rates above that. They're usually, people are looking for kind of 2 or 3% more than what they could get out of a bond. And so right now the bonds are super cheap. Like, you know, CMHC's like the mortgage bond, for the sake of argument, is 1%. Well, that's why people in Vancouver and Toronto are able to pay, you know, get a 3% yield on an apartment building, is because then they're able to get money at 1.5%. So they're actually making even more money above their mortgage. So when we say, you know, you get a great big brand new building downtown, when you take that out to the market and say, I'm looking for a mortgage, every bank on the planet wants that mortgage. It's super nice. It's super low risk. So they will get really, really good financing. So the cost of the debt on those A buildings is low, and people will pay a more aggressive cap rate for it. When you go to a small town, there's fewer lenders who will go to Fort McMurray right now. Less competition, higher prices. So the same lender that might lend a 2% mortgage in Edmonton might charge 3% in Fort McMurray. So those cap rates change in different areas. And a lot of it, almost no one buys apartment buildings cash here. It's a fairly rare occurrence, where if they do buy them cash, they're going to refinance them. And so the banks and the lending absolutely drive the cap rates and the prices here, for sure. But that's why newer buildings will sell at a lower cap rate than older buildings. There you go.
Yeah, very interesting.
It can get so technical, and I have spent, like, the other thing is, like, the bonds they price these mortgages off of are not publicly available. Like, someone's like, what's the spread on the bond to get my mortgage rate? That's not a bond they publish. Like, you have to know someone who gets the email, who knows the pricing. So it is all a little bit opaque sometimes. It all comes back to cash flow, but.
So, Chris, it all comes back to cash flow. Let's go back to your early example, where you had $120,000 worth of income and 40 grand worth of expenses, and so your net operating income was $80,000. And I think you said that was going to be a 5 cap rate, which made that building worth $1.6 million.
Yeah,
that's what you said. So
yep.
play with those numbers a little bit. That's $1,000 a month rent, and play with those numbers a little bit to show people how what seemed to be, if you say I can increase rent $75 a month, for instance.
Absolutely. So we're going to take the average rent. Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize for looking down. I have to play with my yellow pad of paper. So if you take those rents from $1,000 a unit and you bring them all up to $1,075, there are 10 units and 12 months in a year. So now your net income is $129,000 a year. And if you haven't had any big changes in your expenses, that doesn't change. And at the same 5 cap, that can't be right. That is just too far. 129 divided by 0.05. I didn't subtract expenses. There we go.
Take that 40 off.
Minus 40. I do that in the real world too. Now your net income is $89,000 a year before you pay your mortgage, which means now your building's at 1.78, $1,780,000. So that's $75 made you almost 200 grand.
$75 is 200 grand. So people, you don't have to go find a building and bounce the rents by $300 to make a huge improvement in the valuation of your building. So So tell people what it will be like for them. What do they do when they come along and they've located this building where it really is under rented, but for now that's the rent. When they go off to the lender, how do they work the possibility of increasing rent? And let's just say everybody agrees that the building is under rented, and everyone can see that rents can easily be put up and to still maintain a good tenant base. How do the lenders treat it at the acquisition phase where the rents are still $1,000?
Yeah, definitely. And this is actually, it's a really great time because we've gone through cycles where some lenders won't touch multifamily. I mean, a lot of lenders right now aren't going to touch a downtown office building. So right now, pretty much anywhere in Canada, every lender wants multifamily. Every product is available to you. So the one elephant in the room in that building is going to be that CMHC hates vacancy. So if they're under rented, but the building is full, you could probably take it to CMHC. And if you can just drop a notice on them and get the rents up, in most circumstances, CMHC will give you the extra money once the rents are actually effective. So I want to put a pin in that idea about the idea of we're going to give you your mortgage now and more money later, because those holdback situations happen all the time. What's going to happen to most people, whether you're going to CMHC or not, is the lender's going to say, well, your building's worth 1.6 now and it's going to be worth 1.8 later. We'll give you the money based on 1.6 now, and as soon as it's real, we'll switch you. So they'll do sometimes a short-term mortgage, or depending if you want to do other work to try and lower expenses, they'll do an interim mortgage, which might be interest only. So they'll give you, really a two-step process. You go in with a shorter term because you've got a plan. We're going to raise rents. We're going to replace the windows. We're going to, paint 2 units and, raise the rents. And so they'll give you a shorter term mortgage to get into the building and get your work done. And then you're going to go and get term financing or takeout financing once you've got it fully stabilized and the money is kind of all flowing. And honestly, right now, what I see a ton of is people come in and do that short-term financing, and an AFS or a VTB can work really well there. And then when they go for their term financing, that's when they bring CMHC to the table. CMHC is taking 4 to 6 months to process an application right now.
Really?
And no seller on the planet wants to play that game, right? Well, some of them will, but it's usually because they're getting overpaid or they've got other motivations. But yeah.
Wow.
Is the CMHC delay partly busyness and partly COVID, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. They did hire a whole bunch of new people, but a lot of it is because just the rates are so low. They went from seeing an average of kind of 800 applications on the book at any given point in time to well over 4,000. And wow. I don't think that's slowed down at all. So yeah, they are pretty bananas. But that's one of those reasons why for clients anyways, they were like, oh, I want to go to CMHC because the rate is so low. And I was like, if you would slow down a minute and buy the building and get a 12-month interest-only loan or use a HELOC or whatever, or get the seller to chill out, and you went in there and raised the rents, kicked out the ad tenants, do the rentals, whatever, just give everybody like new bathroom taps and say, here's $100 worth of taps and I'm raising your rents $100. You would get a lot more money out of your mortgage. Like, slow down. Like, it's, yeah, that's my favorite thing right now. If you're going to go in and renovate, show value, let your tenants pick the taps. If you're going to raise the rents, do a renovation. And then they realize you're not just trying to suck the money out of everybody. But yeah. And Tim asked the same question. A bridge loan, interim financing, those are all more or less the same. A bridge can refer to something different, but in apartments, it's the same type of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear that the market is really loving multis, and that there are many different loan programs with many different lenders that can accommodate the hidden value that you might find in a multi, and you want to extract it. There probably is a program to let you extract it.
Totally. And the nice thing about this, I mean, for me as a realtor, for lenders, I think for lawyers, is the deals are big enough and complex enough that you get to have a real strategic discussion with a real human being. And so you go to a, I have a really great rep with Service Credit Union right now. And when you call him up with the building, he's going to really dive into it deeply. And then he's going to say, we can do these types of loans for you. We could do a 6-month or 1-year interest only. We could do a 2-year term loan. We could do a 5-year fixed loan. Like, all these different options are there. And these guys understand essentially how to give you enough time to do what you need to, but not so much that they're, giving everybody risk. So there's lots of good options.
Well, we got a couple minutes left here. I think it'd be good to kind of maybe rewind for you. Let's go back a few years, a few less grays. I don't think you have any grays, but a few less grays for me, maybe. And there was a point where, you were doing residential. You talked about a townhouse, in the 2000s, and then you went to multi. So when was that for you? And on top of that, I want to know if you have any tips from your experiences on when people should make that transition or how to make that transition.
Yeah, definitely. I had put so my first property, I paid $250,000 for a townhouse, and tax assessment this year was $197,000. Like, that moment in The Big Short or Margin Call, I love those movies. That was like when I bought my townhouse. It was insane. And I did a couple other flips and things, but I put a whole bunch of my investing career on hold just to be a good realtor, to be a good husband. And I really, except for some flips, didn't buy anything until the right partner tapped me on the shoulder, like literally called me one day and said, how much would it cost to buy a 20 suiter? And I was like, I don't know, we'd need $500,000. And he said, I got it. I got a whole bunch of those Scotia HELOC step programs. And he said, let's go buy it. And I said, okay, cool. Like, the investor was an old friend, has been in this room. And he just called me up one day and we were chatting and he said, we could do this. Like, I want to quasi-retire. Multis, you get a manager. And yeah, the JV partner called me.
It happens, people. It really happens.
It happens. Yeah. You know what? You stick around and you just keep doing it, And I think because I had said no to so many people, eventually karma catches up. But, you pick a specialty and you just really, really dig into it. Eventually it comes to me. But I think that the simpler question is probably still that answer, which is that, when you know enough about the topic, when you have enough other resources to do it. I mean, we went into the deal with $650K and it wasn't enough. We put another couple $100,000 into our building, and it's a special story. But for a lot of people, it's about having the financial resources to be able to really get into it, and be ready to start making those things happen. The flip side, like the easy answer to get in, smaller multis and smaller centers, because the risk is just much smaller. You go buy a 6-plex in a little town, work with the local credit union, you're going to save a lot of fees and a lot of weird costs, and you're going to take your licks on a smaller building. And when you go to buy a 20 suiter or a 50 suiter, you're going to have learned almost all the skills you need over there to really move up the chain. Because if you buy a 50 unit building, if you have one house going into foreclosure, that's a problem, but it's not going to kill you. If your 50 suiter goes, you're in bankruptcy, and that's a bigger problem. So get into those little centers and little buildings, and you can really, move the needle. If it's 6 units, it's commercial. That's it.
That's where you can get started, folks. Yes, Donna.
I'm hoping. I have a question about legal fees. How are legal fees treated for buying a 6-plex versus buying 6 units or 6 doors?
Well, one thing that folks should know is often in multis, there are, for you as a buyer, you have 2 sets of legal fees. You have your own lawyer's fee. If I'm your lawyer, you have to pay me. But lenders often have their own lawyer. Not always. Sometimes in smaller loans with credit unions, they will let one law firm do both sides of it, but it's very common in multis, especially in big ones. You got two sets of legal fees, and they are certainly substantially more. You're paying way more for your building than you would if you were buying a single family home, and your legals are also high. Chris?
Third set of fees too. If you bought a building with a large first mortgage and you got a VTB on it, your seller is going to want you to pay for his lawyer to draft the VTB document as well. So then you're actually paying 3 different lawyers.
And as you said, Chris, before, there are lots of other fees that work into things when you start getting financing on multis and getting bigger commercial loans. Lenders charge you money to lend you money other than the interest. So yeah, that's part of learning how to do this. You have to learn how all those numbers fit together and realize that there is more expense than you will be expecting or that you will be used to when you move into the multifamily sphere. But those are all just numbers you have to plug into the equations and find situations that work for you. There's no sense railing against it. That's the way it is. You got to find situations and deals that work for you and educate yourself on the process. I love Chris's idea of starting with a smaller, say a sixplex in a smaller center where you can go, this building has never had a vacancy. The credit union will help you out without too much trouble. So that's a good way to get started.
And I like to have about, I think, for most of my clients, about 5% will be enough to cover lawyers, lenders, most of the inspections and things. And that's, probably on smaller buildings on target. On bigger buildings, it's overkill, but it's still there are lots of last minute things that'll make you faint at closing. Yeah.
That's a good number, especially on small. I agree. Well, Wayne is speechless. Look at that. Oh, Donna's not.
This was awesome.
Chris, I'd love it if you could come back into the chat and add in your blog and where people can find the book, Apartment Buildings That Outperform.
Yes, indeed.
We haven't scared people off of.
I don't think we've scared anybody. We've
I'm
opened
a
their
little
eyes.
scared.
You didn't find out I was buying a multi on the side, did you? I was going to tell her.
That's what he does.
I was going to tell her.
It really does. It really does scare me when new investors, like super green investors, say that I'm going to get into multifamily. I'm going to be buying an apartment building.
Yeah.
And you want to be honest with them. Like, you got a lot of education ahead of you. And just because you joined some Facebook group does not mean that, and you watched a couple webinars or you took a weekend event does not. Look at all the stuff that we covered today. And I'm sure that's not even a fraction of what you actually need to know in order to be successful.
All the Instagram personalities, they're really interesting people doing cool stuff, but you have no idea what the real book's like in the back end. Like, yeah, man, things can get out of hand quickly with the multifamily building. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with being simple and humble and having a bunch of really great houses. Yeah. I would rather buy a bunch of houses at this point in time. I'd personally rather build a townhouse complex and get the best of both worlds. But don't buy an apartment building because you feel like you need to appease the people in your focus group and keep up with the Joneses.
Yes.
That's good advice. That is good advice.
And don't let us discourage you as well. If you want it, go and get it. Get the education, find the mentor, reach out to Chris. I'm probably, sorry, the wolf. Sorry, buddy. Everybody call Chris. Find someone who can show you, take the right courses, and absolutely do it if that's what you want. But I really enjoyed this today. Really enjoyed it.
It's fun.
Oh.
That's interesting.
And
you did really well.
Enjoyed it.
I'm kind of sorry we didn't get to
one
see
other
a couple
plug.
of Chris's kids.
Oh, I know. I should have texted and had them bring them down. I will say that we're in a creative real estate group. Of the 4 offers I put my hands in today, 3 of them had something creative in it. Assumptions, VTBs. I haven't done an agreement for sale in 8 months, but it happens all the time. And the sellers and lenders all get it. They don't always like it or will even allow it. But the creative stuff happens all day long over here.
That's good to hear. It's good to hear people can leverage some of the principles they learn in this creative group as they as they move on, knowing there's better knowledge as you move up the chain to multis. So that's a really good thing. Very good thing.
I'll add trades. I had a trade show up, an assumption with the VTB and a trade all in one deal. So we'll see if it goes anywhere. I don't know. Sorry?
Yeah. No. I'm just reading the comments. That's all. Sorry.
So,
okay,
Barry, what's going on for Thursday? What do we got going on Thursday?
My producer hasn't told me what I'm doing on Thursday. My backup is always Tales from the Trenches.
I'm working on something. If it works, it'll work. If it doesn't,
it's a secret.
But thank you so much, Chris. I did enjoy that too.
Yeah,
it was
it was good.
I liked having Barry here too. That was kind of
good, down to earth presentation with some great nuggets in there.
Yeah,
Chris could have given it to us at a much higher level than this. Because he knows the ins and outs of this so well. So I appreciated the understandability of how you put it. I think everybody else, it was very very useful, I would say, Chris. So thank you very much for coming on and doing that for us. We appreciate it.
Thanks very much. No, it's fun, and you get such terrific people in this group. I always love catching these videos when I can.
Me too. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for watching.
Sign off now. Thanks again, everyone.